Okay, so good afternoon. We'll get going in just a few seconds. We have to start off with review of our stocks. Not a good day. Viacom down about $1. And it's been trading in this kind of window between 38.50 and 42.50. And we just need to break out. It's an amazing company. I love what it's trading at, but with regards to a PE ratio, but it needs to break out. So not a great day. Hopefully we'll see a good end of the week tomorrow and then next week on that. I did buy Amazon today. I think it's due for a breakout. It's been sitting in the same spot for about 6-7 months now, maybe a little longer than that. I think it should be much higher. So I did take a position in Amazon. And I also, today I realized last week that I had bought and sold Ford, did very well on it, but it was one of those stocks that I could have held because it's up another, $2.50 or $3 since I sold it. Really good prospects for Ford. So that's our rundown. Not a good day so far in the market, but nothing worrisome or out of the ordinary in any way, shape, or form. Okay, so good afternoon. I know there are people here from yesterday. I know there are many emails that I got, many comments that I got, oddly from people all over the state. So yesterday was an interesting podcast. I started off thinking it was going to be a difficult podcast because it was a difficult topic. We had a local representative have an issue that had to be dealt with. It is not my goal to embarrass or hurt people, especially good people. And so people said, you were kind to Robin in having that conversation. People make mistakes. If people need help, they need to get help. We're not going to get on them for things that are human. And so whether Democrat or Republican really doesn't matter. These are human things. These are mistakes that humans make. And in a time where you have unbelievable levels of stress, I know what elected officials went through. Just when the unemployment started during COVID, I probably got 15 calls a day. Can you help? Can you help? Can you help? And some of those calls I could help. Some I couldn't help. Some went to Robin Comey. Some went to Sean Scanlon. Some went to Christine Cohen. And they were very accommodating in helping as often as they could. But if I was getting 15 calls a day, they were getting 100 calls a day. And on top of that, they had their personal business. Most people don't live on living at the state. They had their families to worry about, kids not being in school, their financial issues. Then going back to session this time, a lot of stress. So I'm not shocked that people make mistakes in under stressful situations like we've had the last year. I can't get too hard on Robin for what happened. That said, come election season, whatever it is happens. Now there's the whole glass houses thing, because trust me, plenty of Republicans have had their issues with drinking as well, and including in the legislature, including locally, what have you. My feeling is both sides will probably stay away from those types of topics, but whatever the issue is, she has to deal with it and move on. And that's always going to be the way I approach things. To those that are new to this podcast, let me explain to you the 80% rule, the fundamental belief and the thought process behind what I do. And it's simple. I believe 80% of the population, of the people who vote, who are engaged, are socially liberal and fiscally conservative. Socially liberal in that they don't give a damn who sleeps with who. They don't give a damn what you do, who you marry. They don't care gay, straight, what color you are. Most people don't give a damn. Everybody gets anything they want. That's the way it should be when it comes to social issues. And most people are that way. What happens is political parties end up having to get those 10%ers in, the 10% on the left and the 10% on the right. So somebody in that 80% who's running as a Republican has to make sure they don't alienate the social conservatives. Somebody in that 80% running as a Democrat has to make sure they don't alienate and they get those votes for those 10% of far lefties on the Democratic side. And so instead of just saying, no, I'm a Democrat who's fiscally conservative, they go back to that base. And instead of a Republican saying, no, I don't care who sleeps with who, they have to go back and appease that base. And so we get these sides that are bullshit. My belief and my personal political beliefs are socially I don't even want to have the conversation. Abortion's legal. There should be access to it, period. A law that limits access to it is a problem. You should be able to get married to whoever the hell you want, anywhere, period. Male, female, gay, straight, whatever, who cares? Most of America feels that way. Fiscally, most of America doesn't want to waste money. Fiscally, most of America believes in helping those that need it the most, believes in a social safety net, believes in all of those government expenditures. What they don't believe is government waste. They don't believe in pork. They don't believe in using payoffs to get bills passed. They don't believe in perhaps extra stimulus packages that aren't needed. And so that's the vast majority of people. That's 80% of the population. That 10% on each side dominate the conversation, however. On social media, the people you're hearing from, those loud, obnoxious, pain in the ass people that are filling your Facebook feed, those are the 10 percenters that yell and scream and fight and argue constantly. And so what I said with Brantford 7 was, what if we didn't look at party and we just looked at issues? And on the local level, if a senior center gets built, isn't left or right. The question is it a need? Are we spending money properly? Those are obvious questions. And so we have the people in those 10%, and then we have the other people who want to take a side just for political gain. I'm going to fight that project because a Republican was behind that project. Well, that's just stupid. So on this podcast, we look at things differently. The 80%, socially liberal, fiscally conservative, in the standpoint of we don't want to see waste. And so then we look at an issue. We have an issue like Robin Comey comes up and we say, listen, she clearly was drinking. She admitted she was drinking. That's wrong. She apologized for it. Doesn't undo it. We found out in the Current yesterday and some other articles, this is pretty rampant in Hartford, especially during COVID. Clearly, it has to be clamped down on by both sides. It looks like that will probably happen. Should it ruin someone's political career? I don't believe so. And I don't think the 80% believe so. I could be wrong. I don't believe most people believe that. So I would rather spend far more time talking about Robin Comey's stance on sports betting and tax revenue and housing law and all the issues that are legitimate that really impact our lives. And so we'll always take a moderate view of what we saw yesterday. That would have been the conversation on this podcast yesterday. Then we had, I don't have words for what happened yesterday, for the behavior of one elected official in Brantford. The accusations, the nonsense, the shit that just spewed out of him. I don't know what the situation is. But last night I had to go back and I was upset. There were some friends of mine, and thank you, that texted me and asked if I was okay and called and asked if I was okay, and I was okay. I don't get overworked by most things. If you haven't seen, most of the texts that came in and said, how did you stay calm? I stayed calm because you just kind of, there's a phrase that I use a lot of times called, when I say watch the movie. Stand back and pretend you're watching a movie. And what's the right thing for this character to do in this situation? And I asked myself that. But also last night I had to go back and say, what's the 80% reaction to what we saw yesterday from Mark Riccio? What are the reasonable, logical people's reaction to that? And it's more than anything else, get help. Seek out a therapist. I don't know if there's other issues, but at the very least, seek out a therapist. There's something wrong in your head. You ran for office, you lost. You ran for office knowing there was stuff out there on you already. You ran for office having already posted publicly things that were sexist and inappropriate online. It wasn't like you ran for office and somebody dug this up from 20 years earlier and no, that would have been, we would have thrown that away. Recent things. You made that choice. In a race, by the way, that you really had no chance of winning. It was a Trump campaign, a presidential campaign. It wasn't going to happen. That's it. And so you ran a race, actually ran a pretty decent race, but the fact is, I cover news. I know what you posted. I know how inappropriate it was. And if you're going to post sexist things online, do I think it's appropriate that you go to Hartford and then start passing laws about women's health, hiring female judges, female employees, when clearly you think less of some? You think I'm not going to bring that up? When the 80%ers are socially liberal. The 80% of the state of the country, their viewpoint is, we don't care if they're male or female or gay or straight. You clearly have an agenda against a particular sex. Okay, that's your opinion. Free speech, all that. Doesn't mean I'm going to elect you. Doesn't mean I'm going to vote for you. And certainly doesn't mean I'm going to encourage other people to vote for you. And so Robin Comey had her faults, but Robin Comey never posted sexist stuff online. I never saw anything in her social media. And there, she could be gruff. She can go after you sometimes. She's got some edge to her, no question. But I never saw those things from her. So for the 80% of us, the rest of us, posting sexist things online matters. And we raised that. And then it just became a disaster. And yesterday it came on, and it was, and I said to this, I said, I feel Riccio would be an embarrassment to the town. One, because of the things he had already done, if he was representing this in the state level. And two, because this is somebody who clearly could not control what he writes. I think I was vindicated on that opinion yesterday. I think everyone saw, for the record, that was absurd yesterday. That was not behavior most people should have in any circumstance, never mind an elected official to any position, or for that matter, an appointed position. Get help. Somebody reach out, get help. He shouldn't be on the RTM, but there's no real way to get rid of him from the RTM unless he resigns. He's an elected official. People said to me today, Robin should be fired. Robin can't be fired. She's elected. She was elected, and so that can come up in the next election season. Same thing with Riccio in a seat on the Republican. In Branford, if you're not watching from Branford, we have a representative town meeting. So from the 80% standpoint, that's my response. Was I upset that the claims he made, which were ridiculous and nonsensical? And my inbox was filled with parents afterwards saying that. And I appreciate that. It means a lot. It truly does. Parents I'd never met before sending messages. Some parents said they had their kids watch the show, and I very much appreciate that. But from an 80%er, that's my view. For people who are fit in this category, get help. That's it. That's really all there is to say about that. And the RTM will have to make their decision, and the Republican Party will have to make their decision, and they'll have to, at some point, state something about it, but get that person help. And we have seen this on a regular basis in every town, but in Branford too. We saw this very controversial Parkside project here in Branford. And I was speaking to somebody who was on the commission yesterday, messaging about who was attacked more, that person or the first selectman. And the truth of the matter is the attacks from some of the neighbors, I would say 5 or 6 of the neighbors. There were many who were against it, but 5 or 6 of the neighbors who posted truly disgusting, homophobic, sexist, disgusting things about some of the members of the housing authority and the first selectman. The first selectman, who wasn't necessarily in favor of the project, was only making sure the law was followed. That's all he did. Granted, the attacks from the other side, calling the neighborhood racist, Pottinger calling the neighborhood racist, housing groups calling the neighborhood racist in letters, Ray Dunbar reading a letter calling the town basically racist, was just as ridiculous. That's not something that represents the 80% of people who are reasonable and logical and don't want to hear that nonsense. So part of this podcast and part of this discussion every day is saying, what is the reaction of the largest group in the room of reasonable people? For Riccio, get help. No question. You don't know how to control yourself. You don't know what self-control is. Something is wrong. That's okay. Therapy's good. The stigma around therapy is pretty much gone. Get it. If you had a broken leg, you'd see a doctor. If you have some issue to deal with it, see a therapist. Covered by most insurance. For Robin, she'll have to decide on her own how serious the issue is. If she needs help, get it. No shame in that. There's no shame in going through what we just went through the last year and a half through COVID and breaking down a little bit. There's no shame in that. Get help. And then get back here so we can actually talk about issues, the things that actually impact our lives. Politically, it's fun. Did you see what she said? She was terrible. The video was awful. Yeah, it's fun. That's great. But that doesn't impact our lives. It doesn't impact tax rates. It doesn't impact education. It doesn't impact our health care. There's many things she was doing up there that were positive. There's reasons to like her, not like her as an elected official, but there were some things that were happening up there were positive. And so that's the reaction I have to both of those as someone who is trying to say, let's look at this logically. It was an embarrassment what we saw yesterday. There's no question. Not from Robin, but from Robin, her own issues, but from Riccio. Before I go on a little bit, I want to read some of these comments. Most of us are raising our children to be kind. We don't want to take attacks on others. If you have a reason or a cause and you are working towards something, don't get personal on someone like that. It's not professional, never mind classless. Listen, when people have nothing to say, they make stuff up. And sometimes false claims, especially some of the claims you made last night, are stigmas that can never go away. There's a problem. No question. He has a problem. I can think of one time, I was actually thinking about this today, did I ever talk about somebody personally? Like, I have been hard on some elected officials. I have been, Tom Brockett is running for office as a Democrat in selectman for first selectman. I have made flat out statement that is completely true, and I will stand by, not qualified to hold office, not especially that office, not qualified. Has been dishonest, has spoken out of multiple sides of his mouth, has contradicted himself many times, has made statements that are false, wrote letters to the editor that were completely false and slanderous of private property owners, period. I've been hard on one in the 5th District, Tracy Everson, who I have called multiple times the dumbest RTM member I've ever covered. All of those are about their public actions. I have no idea if they're good fathers or mothers or aunts or uncles or what have you. I don't know who they sleep with and don't care who they sleep with. It doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is their impact representing others and acting in the best interest of their constituents. That's what matters. And so I understand every other podcast and radio show and discussion would focus on the juicy stuff. Oh my God, they played the video Robin called me 1,000 times, and the dumb stuff Everson said 1,000 times, and the contradictions of Brockett 1,000 times, and who they slept with, and who gives a shit? Don't care. And that's going back to, what does the 80% care about? Does the average person really care who people sleep with? That they had too much to drink? No, it's not the end of the world. If she didn't stand up to speak and she had 2 drinks, no one would have known anything. In fact, if Kevin Rennie, who doesn't love this sensationalism, didn't write about it, nobody ever would have. He wrote about it, and then it got to The Current, and came to me, and came to all the other news organizations. At the end of the day, get the help you need, get therapy, we move on. Robin Comey can serve out her term. Riccio, if he has any dignity, would resign. I don't see that happening, but if he had any dignity, he would resign. I'm going to move over a little bit to the animal shelter because, part of what we're just talking about it kind of plays a role here. Branford is preparing to redo its animal shelter, the Cosgrove Animal Shelter. And it's not a small project. I think the value of the project initially was about $2.9 million. $1 million of that was to be raised by fundraising. So part of that, I think a third of that was to come from fundraising. From North Branford, which shares portion of the animal shelter. So only a third of that, or so, maybe 40%, was actually coming from the town. So $2.9 million. Last month, month and a half ago, it went out to bid, and that was approved by the town. And it came back at about $4.6 million. That's not a small increase. That's a significant increase. And that being said, we now have people saying, wait, we have to hold on. And this is true. When the fiscal issues, we should pull back a little bit. Let's look at it for a second and analyze what we should do going forward. One, I'm going to advocate for passing it at the new rate. And there's some reasons I would advocate for that. One is the reasons we need an animal shelter have not changed. The reasons we need this addition have not changed. The need to have safe areas where people can come. I mean, if you go to that animal shelter now, the public comes in and there's no space. It needs these spaces. It needs spaces for cats. It needs spaces for dogs. We have an increase in other animals. It needs these spaces. There's no question that that need was already been determined. The fact that it's now more expensive is based on potentially two things. One, there may have been some issue with the architects and his numbers. Perhaps he underbid or underestimated what it would cost. That could be part of it. The other part of it, as somebody who buys and sells stocks on a regular basis and watches the business world, is the cost of goods has skyrocketed. And not 10, 20%, like 300%, 400%. Google now, the change in the cost of lumber, it's spectacular. So yes, it's more expensive. So here's what happens. We take a project like the animal shelter, we break it down into different contracts, the electrical contract, the plumbing contract, and the construction contract, and the foundation contract. We break that down and we send all these bids out. And anybody who wants to bid on that can bid on that. Part of that bid is we tell them, okay, whatever number you have, we will sign the contract within 3 months. That means your number has to be the same for 3 months. The problem with that is, what's happening with commodities now? What's happening with lumber? What's happening with copper? These prices are doing this. They're going up and down and up and down. So we're asking these contractors to give us a number that they still have to abide by 3 months from now, when there may be significant changes in the cost of goods. So what are you going to do if you're that contractor? You're going to give a higher price. And it turns out, as we opened the bids on all these different ones, the higher prices were coming in across the board. It wasn't one area. It was coming in across the board. That tells us the commodities are more expensive. So the question becomes, do you save money by waiting? Logic tells me no. Logic tells me, in general, we have a significant issue right now with inflation. Now, there's some belief that inflation may be temporary. The word they use is transitory. I don't necessarily believe that. Most economists aren't necessarily believing that. The government seems to, but I don't think economists are believing that. So the inflation increasing, and inflation is increasing, remember, because people have a lot of money. They didn't do anything last year. They saved money. They have stimulus money. So the demand for goods is higher. And also because of COVID, plants shut down, the development shut down. So there's a shortage of goods. And all that does is bring the cost of goods up. I expect that to be in place for 3 or 4 years. I don't think that's going away in 3 months. So if we know we have a valid need, and we know over time it's very likely costs will go up, even with this increased cost, it makes sense to do it now. Now, I've heard one email went around from Wayne Cook, and Wayne Cook is another one of those people kind of in the Riccio camp that probably needs the same type of thing, who has no problem spreading just baseless information. But, oh, this is because we made it green. Well, no, not really. A large part of the green aspects of this building have been donated. But two, I don't fall into the category of someone who has a problem with being made green. And we don't even have to have a global warming discussion, but I like cleaner things. I like less emissions. I like when things are done in our town that are cleaner. Now, do I like having electric cars? Sure, I do. I don't want to build them here. I don't want the factory here, but I sure as hell don't mind having the effects of less pollution. So this knock on green doesn't make any sense to me. I like cleaner stuff in my town. We can have a much bigger argument about global warming, and anybody can go have that and yell and scream at each other. The truth of the matter is, I like it cleaner here. I like the open space that we have added in the last 8-10 years. I like the parks that we have added. I like the trails that we have added. I like not developing Tabor because I like having more open space. And to those that are actually smarter than the average bear or don't want to get into the political debate, it is a massive economic benefit to have open space and more parks and be cleaner. That's a good thing. And the Republican First Selectman has looked at clean and green as an economic driver. One of the things that makes Brantford an attractive place to live, and not for just Brantford, but Brantford, Guilford, or the shoreline, an attractive place to live. We have robust land trusts. We have the Shoreline Greenway Trail. We work with them, and that's a good thing. So this knock on a town being green, if it's a little bit more expensive because it's green, yeah, I'm fine with that. And so the increase, which I think works out to be, hold on one second, I'll pull this up, 2.9 to 1.6, so $1.7 million. The shelter itself has raised, I think, another $300,000-400,000 from over the million. That's part of it. And North Brantford will likely put in some of that as well. That said, we've had projects in the past I spoke against, most notably the Blackstone Library project. And the reason I spoke against it was because the actual need was never presented. The needs they said didn't make sense. We need another elevator. No, I didn't do that. We need more meeting space. Well, the town doesn't need more meeting space. There's nothing saying meetings have to happen at the Blackstone Library. The town had built a firehouse with meeting space, a community house with meeting space. The town had a ton of meeting space. So the reasons they were giving didn't make sense. It didn't have to be a $5 million project. The things that happen at the animal shelter don't happen elsewhere. The Blackstone Library is very nice, but you know who else has a library? Stony Creek has a Willoughby Wallace Library, and you know who else? Every school in the town has a library. There's plenty of damn libraries in town. The need to put $5 million into one of them was more sentimental than an actual need. People like the library. It's a classic building. We wanted to keep it up. That's all it was. We didn't need more meeting space. We had plenty of meeting space in town. We didn't need a giant deck outside with stone patio for people to be on. There's no need for that to be there. That we added $1 million to the project for. We didn't need that. And a lot of things not needed. The animal shelter stuff, we can't do that anywhere else. We can't put stray dogs at town hall. We're not putting the stray cats at the community house. There's only one place to do those things. So if we know the need exists, because we already passed it at 2.729. Now, if somebody came in and said this is $9 million, okay, we stand back. But we know the need exists. There's a 60% increase based on a very logical explanation on what's happening in the world. Get it done. Address the needs. Get it done. It's not going to be cheaper tomorrow. It's not going to be cheaper next year. The demand for builders and developers right now is through the roof. Inflation is real. It doesn't make sense to hold off on a project that's already been deemed necessary. And those reasons why it's necessary hold up. They're real to anybody who's walked through that project. And you have, in history, that department, anybody who's watched our budgets, has been the most proactive in raising their own money, having their own fundraisers. And they are pretty much, East Haven has a shelter. Guilford kind of has one. Other towns have it. But the Cosgrove Animal Shelters serves, much of the state. It does an amazing job. And they're not a massive burden to the taxpayers because under especially Laura Bourbon, they raise a lot of their own money. So yes, it makes sense to step back as logical people, as part of those 80%ers that want to see money spent well, don't want to see money wasted. But when we look at the facts and we look at the evidence, it doesn't make sense to hold this project up. It's unfortunate. For whatever reason, it's higher. Some of the economy, some of the cost of goods, some is inflation. But we also have those same things to look at in the future. Inflation is not going anywhere. So I very much advocate for that project. I think people, the RTM, the Board of Finance, should vote to move that forward. Some of the comments here, Jennifer, yes, you can share the meeting space, schools, and town collaboration. Absolutely. The Blackstone Library, here's what happens with so many of these projects, right? Blackstone wants to push this. They push a narrative of we don't have meeting space. Well, so what? We have plenty of meeting space for all the meetings need to take care of. Nobody says a meeting has to take place at Blackstone Library. You can easily have a meeting at the community house. There's meeting space at town hall. There's new meeting space at the fire department. Community house and fire department are new. Plenty of new meeting space. There were a bunch of other ones too. I don't remember at the top of my list where They list them as needs, and they weren't really needs. They were wants. Period. It never needed to be. Somebody designed this with this huge walkout stone patio that was on the second floor that they all fell in love with, and therefore that was a need. At no point ever was that a need for any library ever. But suddenly we have to have this. And so it became, and what happened? They go to the meeting, they bring in some kids, the kids read a little thing saying, I love books, and because apparently this is the only place on the planet you can read books. And anybody who questioned the expenditure was just, I remember Peter Black got up and said, I question the spending. And I think Peter Jackson called him crazy, because how dare you question spending? Question spending. Question bullshit. When people are selling you something, they're clearly making things up to sell you something. We have an obligation to go and say, okay, are the reasons they're giving us legitimate? With the Blackstone, I could have argued, no, I don't believe they're legitimate. With the animal shelter, I believe they're legitimate. And it's still significantly less than the Blackstone Library project was. So the total project on this is about 4.6, less than the Blackstone project. And it's not something that could be happening at any other, the library we have everywhere. Walsh has a library, and Siney has a library, and Murphy has a library, and Tisco has a library, and the high school has a library, and our elementary schools. Everybody has, every school has libraries. We have 2 public libraries, Willoughby Wallace and the Blackstone. Give me a town that's got more libraries than Branford. We have a duplication of services all over the place. Some of the community events that happen at the library also happen at the community house. You have all kinds of duplication of services. We don't have all kinds of duplication of services with the animal shelter. The Blackstone Library isn't going out and collecting stray dogs. The Blackstone Library doesn't get a phone call when there's feral cats and somebody's on their property. That's not what happens. Only one body, only one department can handle that. So it makes sense taking a reasonable approach and looking at actual needs and looking at the fact that this is not going to get cheaper over time. It makes sense to do it now. It's unfortunate that it was under. It's unfortunate the bids came in higher, but COVID sucked. And seeing lumber 3, 4, 5 times what it was a year ago is crazy, but that's life. I want to make sure I get these comments. Michael, wood prices, yikes. Thank you, COVID. Yes. Michael, any thoughts on suggesting the shelter and the Branford Compassion Club join forces? Compassion Club is a private entity. I don't know if that's been discussed. I know they had fundraisers together in the past, but there's some serious legal issues on combining a private nonprofit with a town entity. So I think that would probably be incredibly time-consuming to do. I don't know for sure. Wendy, I feel the best animal shelter in the state should be fully funded, and I hope to see the project move forward. I think the project should move forward. And I think we should add in, I think the last number I heard was the shelter itself raised 1.3 or 1.4. So they had Jennifer Anaskovich, who is in the center of town, a professional fundraiser, came in. She was paid for it. I think she bid to do that project and was paid for it. I met with her. She showed me all the information. I then had Laura on this podcast about, 4 or 5 months ago, talking about this project. The need for the project has been demonstrated. It makes sense. The question is, do we gain anything by waiting to do it? And based on inflation, based on the cost of goods, and the demand for contractors, I don't believe we do. So it makes sense to do it now. 1.25 looking for 250. So they're at 1.25 in fundraising. They're trying to get to 150. And it's the animal shelter. I'll tell you a little secret about the animal shelter. So I own Branford 7, as people know, the website. And nonprofits all over used to send in, here's our event, here's our event. Here's a secret. None of that works. The people who are going to go to your nonprofit event, the average person is not going to show up at the Sports Hall of Fame dinner just because they feel like it. They're not going to show up at a cancer thing just because they feel like it. Usually the organizer knows people, they know people, there's a connection. So posting it online isn't going to do it. The exception, animal shit. Anything that has to do with animals, you will get people, and we'll see it because we see the traffic numbers skyrocket on anything we read about animals. You will see people from East Haven, West Haven, Orange. I've seen people from Norwalk at animal fundraisers. They can raise their money. They're not going to raise $4 million, but if they need to raise another $250,000 and they can do that aggressively, I believe they can do that. So I would support that project. I think our elected officials should support that project. So guys, thanks for joining. After yesterday, thank you so much for the comments. I'm fine. We can deal with what we have to deal with. We deal with crazy. This town has dealt with a guy driving a truck and a blowhorn around the center of town for years. I've been called every name in the book. We can deal with that. At the end of the day, we hope the people that are dealing with these issues get help. I mean that sincerely. I know what therapy is. I've been in therapy. I left a cult. I had a very, very hard time when I was 29, 30. Very hard time. The vast majority of people I interacted with for most of my life were Jehovah's Witnesses. And so now I'm part of a world I left that I was told my entire life we're going to be destroyed, part of Satan's system and all this other stuff. Becoming who you're going to become was difficult for me. And I did see a therapist for a short amount of time. Not very long, but a short amount of time. I'll tell you something. Best thing I ever did. To this day, there's things that she said to me that stick with me. And it's helped me become who I am. It's helped me become someone who can be reasonable and logical and create what my identity in the life I was going to have. And it doesn't matter if you're 20 or 29 like I was, or 65 or 80. If there's an issue you have to deal with, get help. Get it. If for some reason your self-validation only comes by being an asshole at town meetings, go get help. If you felt the need to come on this podcast and berate me and take over and constantly nonstop over and over allegations, get help. It's okay. It's okay to have something broken in you and you need help. It's okay to have a hole. Get help. And if we left with no message other than that, it's okay. Get help. It's a good thing. And you may not thank me now, but 3, 4, 5 months from now, maybe a year from now, if you do, you'll be glad you did. Guys, it's Thursday, so it's our last one for the week. I thank you for joining me. It was a short week, 3 days with the holiday. I'll be back on Monday at 4 o'clock. I thank you so much for all the support, and I hope you all have a great